Welcome to Access for All, with the Access for All team of Wheelchair Boy, the Stone of Truth, and me, Robert Gorski, dissect and explain different aspects of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA for short. First off today is a thank you from Wheelchair Boy to the listener who sent him a question via the program's email address, which is accessforall@yahoo.com. Wheelchair Boy answered the question himself while I did the typing for him. So far, there's no computer keyboard small enough to accommodate his limited reach, but we're working on it. Now, some of you might think, well, let Wheelchair Boy use a voice-controlled computer. Unfortunately, his voice is also very small and too weak for microphones, but we are working on that too, and someday he and I will share the speaking duties on Access for All. Wheelchair Boy wants me to remind listeners that the email address, accessforall.com, can be used to send your questions and comments to the Access for All team as a group or to individual team members. 2 recent requests for speaking engagements were received, and both have now been accomplished. When you write, remember that the Stone of Truth is very precise about capitalizing the first T in its name. It is the Stone of Truth and not the Stone of Truth. Wheelchair Boy also wants me to point out the updated ADEA anniversary emblem that adorns the table, and will continue to do so for the next many months. Those listeners who have seen past episodes will remember that the emblem displayed on the table had a large number 25 in the middle. This was because the emblem was designed to celebrate the ADA's 25th anniversary in 2015. The emblem has been revised every 5 years since its inception to celebrate the ADA's 15th anniversary in 2005. The emblem is now revised to celebrate the 30th anniversary in 2020, which occurs next, you might remember, July 26. The Access for All team is displaying the 30th anniversary emblem starting now to encourage viewers to look forward to the next July 26 and to think about planning ways to honor and promote awareness of the ADA at any time during 2020, the 30th anniversary year, which for short can be called simply ADA 30. As was the case with ADA 25 4.5 years ago, ADA activities can be educational, such as information tables, news articles, or seminars. They can also be fun, like carrying a banner in the Black History Parade, or putting a graphic on the Rose Bowl video board, or having a conga line in the Doodah Parade and tossing ADA t-shirts into the crowd. Here is one of the actual ADA t-shirts that I saved from 2015. Now, today's key phrase is .gov, because we are going to take a tour of a federal website that is a rich store of information about the ADA and accessibility in general. It is a website of the United States Access Board, and the web address is www.access-board.gov. Now, in the previous Access for All, I presented examples of the richness by showing 2 computer animations that are on this website. If you can recall, one animation explained and illustrated basic spatial needs for operating a wheelchair, and the other animation showed how protruding objects interfere with pedestrian travel by people who are blind or have impaired vision. In today's program, we are going to uncover the full depth of information on this website. Much relates to the accessibility ADA requires in the physical environment. Thus, the board's website has no information on employment of or customer services to people with disabilities. At the same time, there is much information on the Access Board website that relates to other laws on accessibility in the physical environment, for which the Access Board plays a research and sometimes an enforcement role. On our tour through the website, I'm going to show you everything in order to give you a sense of the wide scope of accessibility. Further, knowing more about these other dimensions of accessibility will aid you in understanding of the ADA. Let's start with the Access Board's homepage. As you can see on your television screen, there's a lot of information on this website, and this is just the home page. And of course, at the top, there's a search box. The next row down has some major topics: the board, guidelines and standards, training, enforcement, and research. Over on the far right, there are some featured links. Below that are upcoming events. September 24th, September 25th. Over here on the far left, there's a lot of major topic areas. And below that, we have board news, ABA complaint and grassroots campaign revised, and access to popular Texas dam. The next news is Access Board releases voluntary guidelines for onboard wheelchairs and public comment. And there's a picture of a onboard wheelchair that would be used on an airline or airplane in order for a disabled passenger with a mobility disability to get off and on the plane. And also there's view more board items. It goes back into deep, dark history here. At the bottom, you have various information, contact us, site map, accessibility statement, and what have you. So let's go back up to the top. And here in the sort of orange section, brown section, we have a link to the board, which would give you background information and the history of the Access Board. As I mentioned to you in a previous program, the Access Board is a very small agency with a very large role in the accessibility. It develops guidelines and researches guidelines and standards, and also enforces the Architectural Barriers Act, not the ADA. The ABA applies to federal facilities. So we'll skip guidelines and standards for now. There's a training tab. We'll click on that. Takes you to a training section, describes the training, tells you that there are things called webinars that you can attend on the computer. You can, there's a webinar calendar that tells you what's coming up. Let's look into that for a second or two. September 24th, we've got a webinar happening on evaluating websites for accessibility websites. On October the 3rd, there's a webinar on accessible toilet rooms, very important. On the 24th, there's another webinar on accessible bathing facilities. And you can join these by computer by following the instructions on how to get connected to the webinar. So let's go back. And there's the training. There's even a training calendar where you can go and be involved in training at different locations. October the 7th, there'll be an Access Board team in Washington, D.C. On October 14th, they'll be in Charlotte, North Carolina. October 31st, they'll be in Atlanta, and so forth and so on. Okay, let's go back to the home page. Enforcement. Okay, remember, I said the Access Board does not enforce the ADA, but it enforces the ABA, the Architectural Barriers Act, which applies to federal facilities. So if you run into a post office where there's a problem, or a national park, or a federal penitentiary, and you run into a barrier, you might want to file a complaint with the Access Board. Filing a complaint, let's look into that for a moment or two. You can file it online, you can do it by email, you can send it by fax, or you can mail it. And the file complaint form is very simple. Let's see now, where to go? Oh, I see, we just press on this. Online complaint form, I'm sorry. That'll take you to another website. Where there's an explanation of the complaint form. Here are the 5 steps on filling out the complaint form. Here, step 1 through 5. You want to fill one out online, you press that. And here is very simple boxes to fill in about where the problem occurs, what the address is, and then there are other steps 2 through 5, where you fill in other blanks with information. It's all very simple. You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to be an architect. You don't have to know legal mumbo jumbo. Just describe things as best you can in lay language. So let's go back now. Let's see if I can make this a little larger again. Okay, we talked about training, we talked about enforcement. A major part of the Access Board activity is research. And here you can read about the research that is going on still, because accessibility is like an industry that will never stop. It's like the ever-ready buddy. There's always something new. Although all the basics have been decided on and are in the guidelines, there's still applying the guidelines to specific environments is still going on. Sorry, I just pressed the wrong button there. Let's get back to the Access Board. And we'll continue our tour by looking at, okay, this is not what I wanted. Sorry. Let's type it again. access-board.gov. Okay, there we are. So let's look at some of these featured links. Here's some more information about onboard wheelchairs. Here's where you can go to read the ADA standards. Here's where you can go to remember the accessibility animations, 2 of which we saw last month. These are great if you're just beginning to get educated about the nuts and bolts of the accessibility issues guideline, the ADA guidelines. We have computer animations that run about 9 minutes each. They are also captioned and they have voice, so you can get the information in a variety of formats. I keep going back too far. Hopefully I can stop doing that. Okay, we have accessibility animations, ICT Refresh. Now, what does that mean, ICT? Well, it's because the board is involved in a lot of different areas, and ICT stands for Information Communication Technology. There are actually accessibility issues involved in this kind of area, and the government has decided the Access Board needs to come up with guidelines and standards so that people with disabilities can have equal access to information technology. Okay, I'm going to go back just one step, and hopefully we will be at the home page again. It says waiting for response. I guess we're a bit slow today. Maybe it's the heat. We should be back at the home page. Okay, there we are. And as you can see, there are also another way to get to the webinars, another link to the ABA complaint form. And the ABA stands for Architectural Barriers Act. Okay, it applies to federal buildings. Now let's go over to the far left and look at some of these major activities that the Access Board is involved in. We already mentioned communications and information technology. And here's another more explicit, has more information about the board is doing. This is an area that involves the 504 standards from the Rehabilitation Act. There's something called the Refresh of the Section 50 standards and the Telecommunications Act accessibility guidelines. These are all activities where the board plays in a very important role. Let's go back, hopefully, just one step now. Recreation facilities. You wouldn't think that would be a big topic, but it is. This involves everything from child tot lots to outdoor parks and shared paths. Shared paths is a very interesting area where the board is involved in. What is a shared use path? Well, you find out it's a path that's used by vehicles and pedestrians and skateboarders and other people with and anyone else with a disability. You find these a lot in some of the more undeveloped areas of parks and wilderness areas. And again, the federal government has decided that we need to look at the accessibility of these kinds of facilities for people with disabilities. Buildings and sites, that's a big one. And again, you can go to this area and it tells you where the board is involved in. It's involved with the ADA standards and the ABA standards. And we'll get to a close look at the ADA standards in just a few moments. Another major area is streets and sidewalks. We talked about that at the last program of Access for All. Again, here you can learn about something called public rights-of-way. That's sidewalks and crosswalks. And again, shared use paths. Transportation, now that's an area that we haven't as yet not covered in Access for All. The board is involved in that also because there are transportation facilities that need to be accessible. There are transportation vehicles that need to be accessible, and there's even passenger vessels on the ocean. Now, interestingly enough, most of these areas are not involved with Title II-A of the ADA. That's the title that applies to state and local governments. And it's not involved very much with Title III of the ADA. But it is involved a lot with Title II-B of the ADA, which covers transportation and is enforced by the U.S. Department of Transportation. But again, the Access Board is involved at the basic level, researching just what makes an accessible boat, an accessible train car, an accessible bus terminal. Finally, we have healthcare. Now that's become a major area of accessibility, and the board has just been getting into that with researching medical diagnostic equipment. You can read more about that, and prescription drug container labels. A lot of people with vision impairment have long had trouble with reading the important information on a drug container. I do too also. I have to get a magnifying glass sometimes. Now, to learn more about the ADA standards, there's various ways of getting in there, but let's choose this. And very interesting section of the website. Here's a page that begins to tell you about just general, and over on the right you have links to the actual standards. Then you have a link to a guide to the standards that tells you about it. There's another link to the background. Let's take a look at how the ADA standards look on this website. So first you have some basic introduction, and then you have over on the left, far left, the chapters in the ADA accessibility standards. There's a chapter called Application and Administration, kind of administrative kind of things. Scoping requirements is Chapter 2. Chapter 3 is Building Blocks. That's basic dimensions that are needed for wheelchair operation and other such things. Chapter 4 is Accessible Routes. Gets into the pedestrian issues and also both indoors and outdoors. Chapter 5 and 6, so it's Chapter 6 is very important, plumbing elements. That means bathrooms and restrooms. And it goes on to communication and whatever. And each of these leads to a very interesting set of the actual regulations. Let's look at Chapter 6 for plumbing elements. And you see this is a very long web page with lots of verbiage and lots of figures, but it's not all that really hard to read. Let's go back to the home page and finish up this tour through the website of the Access Board. Again, here are the board news releases. Here's our events coming up. And finally, near the bottom, we have information about how to contact the Access Board. Okay, thank you for listening to this rather interesting, I hope you found it interesting, tour through the website of the Access Board. Now next we will begin a tour through another government website that is also a rich storehouse of information. But first, we will take a short break in the program for 2 public service announcements from 2 of the many worthy service groups in Pasadena.
Is your business having difficulty filling vacant positions, especially entry level? Pasadena Civitan is a community group promoting the employment of people with disabilities. Hello, my name is Chancey, and I'm a Pasadena Civitan member. Job developers like me help people with disabilities find jobs, and we want to assist your business to succeed. We have diverse candidates with the abilities you are looking for. For more information about our Pasadena Civitan and our employment programs, email pasadenacivitan@gmail.com. Thank you.
Hello, animal lovers. I'm Darlene Papa, Web Manager PR for Lifeline for Pets, your amazing no-kill animal rescue in Pasadena. We provide cageless care for homeless cats until a loving home can be found. Adopt, foster, or sponsor from us, and we'll make you a perfect match. We're proud to say that we've just been voted Reader's Choice Favorite Animal Charity. Sweet or shy, kitten, adult, senior, or special needs, we have them all. Visit us at lifelineforpets.org and also see us at the Pasadena PetSmart on Foothill Boulevard most Sunday afternoons. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts and paws.
The second website we will briefly visit now and more extensively in a later program was created by the United States Department of Justice. It is devoted exclusively to the ADA, and its address is ada.gov. If you remember the graphic of the great hand of the ADA, the Justice Department enforces 2 of the ADA's 5 areas of coverage. One is Title IIA, which covers the services of state and local governments. The other is Title III, which covers private businesses, both for-profit and non-profit, that serve the public. There's only enough time in the program for to examine the homepage very briefly, but it is full of information. So let's go to it. Here's the ada.gov homepage of the maintained by the U.S. Department of Justice. Right in the middle, it says there's an introduction to the ADA. And then, because of the hurricane season, I guess it's felt that preparedness and response is a very interesting thing to talk about. And from here, if you click on this link, you'll go to various information about how emergency shelters need to accommodate people with disabilities, all disabilities. Over on the far right, very interesting topic, service animals. Let's go into that just for a moment or two. It says service animals frequently asked questions. Here's a long page about questions that come up when the issue of a service animal. What is a service animal? What does do work or perform tasks means? Another important question that comes up, number 3, are emotional support, therapy, comfort, or companion animals considered service animals under the ADA? And the answer is no. The animal has to be trained to provide a particular service for the person with disability. Just providing comfort is not sufficient. And the question goes on to general rules and blah, 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 many questions. Certification and registration is an issue that comes up, and so forth and so on. So let's go back to the home page. Over on the far left, this is a really interesting thing, a list of settlements and memorandum of agreements that the Department of Justice has made with various entities. Here's one that they made with the New Jersey Board of Elections to ensure that their polling places are accessible. Third one down is the Indiana High School Athletic Association. This was a case where a person with a disability was denied the opportunity to participate in high school athletics because it was felt it was too much of a risk. Well, that proved to be not a legitimate reason. Therefore, the school had to make all kinds of accommodations and pay the person a total of $7,500. Next one down is the Roberts Riverwalk Hotel. Let me show you what one of these looks like. Has a background in jurisdiction, remedial actions, and here's one of the things that's really interesting about these settlements, because if someone complains to the Department of Justice about a particular barrier at a particular location, the Justice Department goes in and says, hey, look it, we can take you to court, or let us come in and we will go through your entire facility, noting down everything that is out of compliance with the ADA, and we won't fine you for out of compliance, but you have to make an agreement to fix these things with a certain amount of time. So this particular hotel has to do a lot of work. Parking areas, Roman numeral small I, accessible path of travel, exterior ramp, exterior door, pool, chairlift, and on and on and on. So one complaint can have a huge impact on accessibility at a particular location. Now we also have how to file a complaint. And we have an ADA information line that you can call, any 800 numbers. There are ADA updates you can sign up for. There are links to other aspects of the ADA. So this is an amazingly rich website that you should all be familiar with. It's called ada.gov. Now, an upcoming program will delve much deeper into the vast information vault of this Department of Justice website, devoted entirely to Titles 2A and Title 3 of the ADA. For today's program, I hope that when you want information about accessibility in the physical environment, think of today's keyword, .gov, and remember the website addresses of the access-board.gov and ada.gov. Another key phrase to remember is this program's email address, accessforall@yahoo.com. Use this address to send comments to the program and questions about the ADA. Please keep your questions focused on only the ADA. The Access for All team won't answer questions about disability insurance, adaptive equipment, or your sister's medical condition. Is that correct, Stone of Truth? A warm affirmative. Now be sure to tell friends, neighbors, and others about Access for All. Everyone should be interested in the ADA because hardly anyone goes through life without a temporary or permanent experience with disability. In fact, it is appropriate to refer to people who do not have a disability today as temporarily able-bodied, TAB, TAB for short. Until the next program, I wish all people with disabilities and all TABs well, and let's look forward to the day when the Pledge of Allegiance concludes with liberty, justice, and access for all.